On December 19th, 2025, a change to the way that cargo trading works in Tradelands was introduced to the game. After the change, many players began to ask if cargo trading was still profitable, and we here at the Tradelands Nation saw this as a call to action. And we did what we always do when changes like this happen to trading, and that is of course to run every single trade ship on every single trade route in the game to determine what is the best way to make money. And now that we are at the point where we are ready to reveal our results to the community, we hope that you too can benefit from our experience that culminates in today's video, which is our guide to trading in 2026. To begin, I first need to define some of the key terms that I am going to use throughout this video. If you've seen our previous guide on cargo trading, then a lot of this will be familiar to you. And then we need to discuss what the change actually was and how it actually impacts the game. Let's get started with a quick review of what's changed. Prior to this change, cargo trading was straightforward. You picked up cargo from one place and you sold it at another. The farther the port, the more money you generally made while selling. But there was no indication of how much you would be making when you sold that cargo at your destination. So finding the most profitable routes was usually trial and error until you found one that works. Most players picked the triangle trade route, which was one of the most heavily used routes and also one of the most profitable routes in the game. This led to another mechanic called low demand, where if a person in front of you traded at that same route, then you would be penalized at trading at that same port. This was originally designed as a way to entice players to pick other routes, but it didn't work, largely because you didn't have any control over what other players in this game were doing, so it was still best to continue working on a tried and true profitable trade route, which is why most players continued to use the triangle trade route until they could find another way to make players switch ports. And on December 19th, this mechanic was in fact changed. Now, when you go to the trader, it will show you how much each crate of cargo will sell at every other port that you can trade it at. So you can plan in advance which port you want to go to, and you'll know how much that low demand will affect you because you can see how much money you will make. And in general, ports that are farther away will typically provide more doubloons when you sell cargo there, and ports that are closer to you will sell for less doubloons when you sell there. You have to be careful though, because if a lot of other players are also going to a port that is far away, the cargo price on that port will go down. So it's possible that ports that would normally have a very high price may see their cargo prices go as low as 24 doubloons per cargo. And this is a great improvement from the old system, but it is still greatly flawed, because these numbers don't actually tell you anything useful when you're looking at them at the trader. They're just numbers. And in the past few weeks while I've been collecting this data, I've seen players constantly trading at unprofitable trade routes, doing things such as going against the wind or taking cargo to the farthest port just because the number was the highest, even though it took them 3 times longer to go there. And it quickly became apparent to me why the community pans this as one of the worst updates to Tradelands over the past year. And it's mostly because the new UI for this trading system is actually doing more harm than good. Which is the reason for this video, which leads me into the next question, which is how do we actually measure profitability as a trade runner? And for this, we use a term called trade velocity, or TV for short. This is your profitability over time, and it's calculated as the amount of money that you make on a trade run divided by the time it takes you to make that trade run. It's usually shown as doubloons per second or doubloons per hour, and for this guide, we will be using doubloons per hour for simplicity, although some of our previous guides would have referred to this as doubloons per second. Nearly all of the remainder of this video is going to focus on how trade velocity works, so I'm going to save the further explanation on this until later. The second most important term is called dock time. This is defined as the time spent doing the following activities: docking your ship at a destination, selling cargo at that destination, purchasing new cargo, and then of course leaving that destination. When we calculate dock time in our guides, the timer starts from the second that the sails on your ship are shut off as you're coming into the port on your trade run, to the second your sails are turned back on when you're heading towards your destination. All of the other activities in between, such as turning your ship around, jumping off your ship or jumping onto the docks, flashing your sails, basic maneuvering in port, things like that, all of these are considered dock time. Note that using your sails while maneuvering your ship in dock is also called dock time, as the calculation only stops once you have turned them on permanently while heading to your next destination, which means you're actually leaving the port and not turning your sails off again. Dock time in the early days of the game was one of the most important factors. It accounted for somewhere around a quarter of the total time you would spend trading, because you had to manually load and unload your ships back in the day. And if you were a crew of one, well, you did that manually and that took minutes of your time. And again, most of your trade run was based on that. This went away for the most part once they introduced the cargo hold, but this is actually important once again. And it's all because an important factor has been added to the game, and that is the map update. Maneuvering in port is much harder to do in the new map update than it was in the old one. This is due to what I'm going to refer to as game design flaws, which can cause your ship to get stuck if you're not careful. The main offender are these pylons, which for some reason are collidable with your ship. And I'll point out that this seems to be by design because sometimes the objects in the game do not collide with your ship, such as the times where your bowsprit will actually go right through another object. So I'm not sure why they did it with these pylons. The decision to remove the dock masters from these islands means that you can get yourself in a position where approaching a port the wrong way can cause you to have to do a complete reset or straight up just quit the game. It's especially difficult if you're a new player because some of the smaller ships have high maneuverability and they're easy to collide with the docks. Moreover, the December 19th update increased the importance of crosswind trading, which means you will have to do a lot of maneuvering in the ports if you want to maximize your profitability. And players who become an expert at managing dock time lead us to our third term that is important to this game, and that is piloting. Piloting is to trading what helming is to combat. The real-world definition of a marine pilot is a professional navigator who guides ships through complex shipping lanes, waterways, harbors, and ports. These are skilled professionals in navigation with expert knowledge in specific waters, including handling ships of all types and sizes. And this definition fits Tradelands terms almost perfectly. A Tradelands pilot would be a player who is well-versed in how to run certain Tradelands very efficiently, or know how to enter and leave specific ports in the most effective way. We can actually define Tradelands maritime pilots as being able to do two things. 1. Consistently run trade routes above the average time of their ship. And 2. Are able to enter a port, buy and sell cargo, and leave that port without stopping their ship. Because when you don't stop your ship, that would give you a dock time rating of 0. A good pilot is an expert in at least one of these two categories, and an exceptionally good pilot can do both of these consistently. A lot of this will just come with practice and training with specific ships and routes. For example, I'm an expert beaver pilot, and I'm very familiar with its handling characteristics, and I can generally get it to outperform other traders who also run a similar ship. These are the three terms that I would be referring to throughout this video, but if there is one that is the most important, it is definitely the first one, trade velocity. This is essentially how profitable you are as a cargo trader. And the key to this is understanding two things. First, what makes a good trade ship, and second, what makes for a good trade route. And let's start with what makes a good trade ship. A quick disclaimer, this is going to be a very technically heavy session with a lot of math and statistics, so if you aren't interested in the math behind the answer, then here is the chart that shows the updated list of all trade ships by level and the trade velocity you should expect to get from them while you are trading with that ship. This chart will be available on our website, which will be linked in the description below. Note that for ships that had multiple variants that are capable of trading, we only listed the most profitable variant. I did add a couple of exceptions to this, but I'll cover those in the Q&A section. Moreover, I only ran trade ships that I had access to, so sorry to all of you hind hauler variant owners out there, you're on your own for doing your own type of analysis like this. In general, the top trade ships with an average trade velocity of around 50,000 per hour are the Albatross base variant, the Brigand hauler variant, and the Vulcan hauler, the Camel, the Demeter, and the Ceres. These are your top trade ships in the game, and they've been the top trade ships in the game for some time, with the exception, of course, of the Vulcan, which was recently added to this list because it was recently added to the game as well. But our next question is often, what ship should I get at each level? And for this, our guidance has changed from our past recommendations. Now, my recommendation is to get a trade ship every other level, and not pick up a new trade ship at each level as we did in the past. On this chart, I've put in bold the top performers that we are recommending that you get for trading while leveling. The Peddler is your best starting ship. I recommend you skip the Heron at level 2 and instead wait to purchase the Dart at level 3, and then wait until level 5 where you can get the best low-level trader in the game, the Grace, which will almost double your trade velocity and put you in the 30,000 per hour category. From here, you have a choice. At level 7 is the Goose. And this is a good option if you do not intend to continue trading on the Trade Guild faction. But if you aren't opposed to using Trade Guild, then instead I would not build the Goose and I would wait until level 8 and get the Beaver, which is the best trade ship in the game for reasons again that I will explain later in the Q&A section. After this, of course, is the Dolphin. So if you got the Goose at level 7, the Dolphin is the ship that you would get at level 9. That is, of course, if you didn't get the Beaver. And then I would skip all of the ships at level 10 and wait until level 12, because again, there is no level 11 ships, and then pick one of the options that are available to you here. And this is where it gets interesting. If you have access to the Brigand Hauler variant, then this is one of the best 2 trade ships in the game, and you should definitely get it. But if you don't, the next best option here is the Gargoyle, which is also a top performing ship at level 12. Moreover, when you move on to a new trading ship in the future, you can actually turn this into a quasi-combat ship instead. And you will probably do that when you get to level 16, because then you can purchase the Albatross. And the base variant Albatross is the other one of the top 2 trading ships in the game. Once you have either the Albatross or the Brigand Hauler variant, congratulations! You have now reached the top earning trade ship in Tradelands. And now you have won the game of trading, and you can move on to other professions. Now, for the long-term players, the numbers on this chart may come off as a bit arbitrary or head-scratching, so I will just say this is the actual data we collected on every ship after running every trade route and recording their results, and the trade velocity, and netting its average over the entire time we traded. And I will admit that I'm able to go back and probably shave a few seconds off this, because I learned more the more I traded. I learned more about the ship handling the more that I handled those ships, and I learned more about how to approach each destination the more that I ran those trade runs. And so I became better at playing the game as I did more trading. So it's possible I could shave a few seconds off each of my trade runs, but this is just semantics really, because at the end of the day, it doesn't change more than maybe 50 doubloons, and that's basically within a margin of error. And that's why you'll see things why I can't tell you if the Brigand Hauler variant or the Albatross base variant is better, because this is well within what I see as my tolerance for margin of error. So this isn't a definitive stack ranking. The real question that I'm trying to answer here is, what is the common themes in the ships that I found that have an impact in the results? And thankfully, nearly all of the things that actually impact a ship's cargo performance can be found in the shipwright. So let's talk about those key characteristics. The first and most important that impacts your cargo trading ability is, of course, its cargo and speed. This, at the most basic level, is trade velocity, right? It's the amount of money you're going to make over the time that it takes you to make that money. More cargo and faster ships means more profits, and the payout at the end of the journey is what makes the biggest difference. And second to this is the characteristic called turning rate. It makes the second spot because it has an incredibly high impact on dock time. Previously, you could only see turning rates for variants, but that number is now available in the shipwright, and it seems like it was a recent addition. As a general rule of thumb, anything with a turning rate above 10 is fast, and anything that is less than 10 is slow. Knowing that the amount of turning speed is exponential, it's not linear. In other words, when making a 360-degree turn, a speed 16 ship is only 2.5 seconds faster than a speed 15 ship, but a speed 9 ship is nearly 14 seconds faster than that of a speed 8. And there is a correlation between the turning rate and the level. Ships that are at level 9 or below tend to have quick turning rates. That means that their turning rate is 10 or higher, whereas ships that are available at level 10 and beyond tend to have turning rates that are at 10 or lower, making them much slower. In practice, I found that the most profitable ports tend to require a course correction after you purchase cargo for your next trade run. And in cases like this, the speed at which you can turn your ship increases the profitability of your trading. On lower level ships, this only amounts to a few seconds of difference, but on higher tier ships, this could amount to you saving almost half a minute per run, which is significant, as in thousands of doubloons per hour different. The next factor is a mixed category, which I loosely define as ship maneuverability. More importantly, I mean the ability to maneuver around obstacles. It's really a mix of two important factors. The first is the ship's torque, which is loosely based on the size of your ship. In general, the longer your ship is, the worse it will perform in maneuverability. The reason is complex, but in an attempt to simplify the math, if you have two ships that are side by side and they are both turning at the same speed, the bow and stern of the longer ship is actually turning faster because it has a larger circumference. And in the real world, This is why things like a baseball bat, for example, hits harder at the end of the bat than it does at the handle, and in effect would mean that larger ships could be batting smaller ships around the map. So to offset this, the game mechanics are built so that the wider the radius of your ship, the lower the torque or pushing power you have at those ends of the ship. This makes sense in context of the game, but it means bigger ships have a higher chance of getting stuck in ports. Consider this parallel parking job I've done here in a Demeter, which on the surface is actually impressively done, because parallel parking is actually the way you should be doing it to be kind to the other players in the game. But as any experienced Demeter pilot will know, this is actually incredibly bad for you, because the Demeter cannot push its way out of this spot, meaning I can't turn it around. It has to go into the White Crest Harbor before it is able to turn around, which costs you valuable time in your trade runs, but it's also blocking pretty much everybody else from being able to trade at this port as well. And that example is just a Demeter. Each ship has its own characteristics like this, and unfortunately, those aren't available to us as players in the shipwright, so we have to learn a lot of this through trial and error. The other component of maneuverability is in the shape and cosmetics of the ship. The problem with this game is that ships can get caught in the docks. As I've already mentioned, the pylons are the biggest problem. More specifically, they are collidable with your ship. This is a major problem, and especially dangerous for ships with high turning rates, because there's no way to extract yourself once you've gotten stuck. And I will just tell you now, it will happen to you. And the next thing you'll find out right after you get stuck is that the game developers have removed all of the dock masters outside of your home island. So if it happens to you, the game is effectively over. You've lost that trade running. Who knew you could actually lose at a peaceful trading game? Because without the ability to actually unstick your ship, the only option you have is to basically restart the game in most cases, or resetting can sometimes get you stuck in combat logging jail for some reason, which eludes me as Trade Guild, so you might actually have to quit the game entirely. Anyway, the most common thing that will get you stuck is your bowsprit. That's the front pole in the front of your ship. It's especially a problem on low-level ships where the bowsprit is lower in the water. The second most common thing is your long guns. In fact, if you're playing on Trade Guild, or that you plan on being a Trade Guild player for the long term, I actually recommend that you invest in some carronades and put those on your ship, and not long guns, because you're going to use these to hold crew members, not because you need to use them in combat, and because long guns will get you stuck in some ports on some ships, and it's more common than you might think. Now, with cargo capacity, turn rate, and maneuverability out of the way, the fourth and final factor is points of sale. Now, some players I'm sure thought this should have been one of the highest ones on my list, but I thought so too actually, until I started trading on these ships. Especially after you're familiar with the characteristics of these ships and you've used them for a while, you learn that your ability to trade on these becomes muscle memory. Points of sale actually factored the least in terms of all overall profitability on my trade runs. In an attempt to explain why this is the case, when you go to the shipwright, you can see the points of sale map for every ship. This graphic is great, by the way, and it was a game changer when it was first introduced. But what I did was attempt to flatten out this graph so it's not a circle, but put it on a straight line. Here's an example of a ship and the performance that I graphed while trading. When you look at the sailing speed this way, you begin to see what I call the performance threshold. This is the point at which your ship is moving at its max speed towards a destination, where the curving of the wind gets you to your destination at the same speed that you would if you went in a straight line. And all ships have this performance threshold. And I found that nearly all ships fit into one of three performance groups. I categorized them as 60 degrees, 90 degrees, and 120 degrees. So if you see me refer to a point of sale rating, I'm referring to this, 60, 90, or 120. In other words, this is a sort of do not exceed threshold in terms of the direction you are traveling. And you can measure this by seeing how far to port or starboard the flag on the top of your ship is flying. If you are on a ship that is rated at 60 degrees, for example, then your flag should never be pointing beyond this. On the other hand, if you're in a ship that is rated at 120 degrees, then you don't want your flag flying beyond this angle. Anything in front of this angle is fine, but not after. Once you get the hang of this and start sailing with this in mind, you'll find that crosswind sailing actually isn't as daunting or as slow as it seems at first, and that the threshold points are actually pretty wide, wider than the charts at the shipwright would have you believe. And the final thing I'll say about the point of sale chart is that it gives the impression that the speed change is gradual, when in practice I found that it's a lot more apparent. as in you can actually feel it when you hit the performance threshold that I had mentioned earlier. I'll try to show you what I mean, but it may not be as apparent as it is for me because I'm literally pushing the keys and looking at the screen while I do it. This is a trade run that I actually did on a live stream. I'm running a Beaver, and the trade route I'm running is between Harrisburg and Blackwind Cove. At the top of the screen, I've also superimposed a stoplight. I'll turn it green when I actually hit the 120 degrees threshold, so hopefully you can see the difference before and after. My bowsprit is past it, so I can turn in now. There it is. Did you see it? Right there. I felt it. Right there. The ship's going much faster now. You see, it's like an immediate piece of feedback. So, you know, I know the shipwright's wind indicator thing is a circle, but it certainly doesn't feel like a circle when you're driving it, I'm telling you. Like, it felt like it immediately went up to my target speed. When I hit it, there wasn't a gradual change in the ship's speed. It was actually noticeable by the way that the map is moving and the way that the ship feels when I'm turning it. And while it may not be easy to see here as an observer, when you are piloting a ship like this yourself and you hit that threshold, the handling changes. And I was actually trying to explain on this stream that despite how slow the ship looks like it's actually going faster than it looks. And the only way to really notice it is if you actually time your runs, and you'll see that the ship is going faster than it looks like it's actually going. But anyway, that's the gist of it. Like I said at the start of this section, that is a lot of technical detail, and I intend to make all of these stats available on our website, and when I do, I'll add a link in the description of this video. But in short, you really don't need to be an expert in all of these factors. The net of it is all culminated in this one chart that we put together for you. This is our actual experience running every single trade route, and some of them have been run multiple times to confirm accuracy of results. And in the end, what really makes the difference isn't the ship itself, it's how well you personally can handle that ship. And that is from practice, it's from trade running. So you know how it handles and what your preferences are in a ship, you won't be able to reach its maximum performance. And of course, there's also the factor of pirates, which we didn't cover in this video. It's really a discussion for a later time, but your ship also has to have a crew that is able to fight off any would-be attackers. So that's also something to keep in mind. And now that we've talked about the best trade ships in the game, the next and most important question is, what is the best trade routes in the game? And this is a lot more complicated and also a lot more important because it was the actual change that was made to the game on December 19th. It's mainly because the game's change was made specifically to change the way cargo prices are calculated, and it was meant to deter players from running the same trade route over and over. Unfortunately, the interface does the terrible job of conveying this to the player, and I'm actually going to commit blasphemy here because I want to cover this topic and then not have to talk about it again. But I'm going to use Starlit Isles interface to show you what a good interface should look like. In the Tradelands interface, what you have is a bunch of numbers, and you have no idea what the multipliers are, what these numbers even mean, what the distances are to various ports, or any indication of what port the game is trying to get you to go to. There's no recommendations. This is the Starlit Isles interface, and at the surface it does the same thing that Tradelands does. But I can open additional details, and I can see the multipliers, and I can even calculate the earnings that I would get at various ports, and it even color codes the ports that it's telling me to go to. Now, Starlit Isles interface is also imperfect, and I have my own separate criticism, but that belongs on a Starlit Isles video, not this one. But hopefully this adds some clarity as to why I'm saying that a month after the release of this new trading system, players still haven't adopted it because the interface doesn't help you reach the conclusion the game is attempting to get you to take. Now, I'd like to sit here and tell you that there are a couple of good trade routes and you should always run these, but the truth is, the good trade routes change. They change throughout the entire time I was running these. The change is based on the penalties that are being applied to cargo rates, which are now based on how people are trading at other ports. So instead of recommending a set of specific trade routes, instead, we're recommending an approach. We've analyzed the various prices that you can get by selling cargo and have created a matrix of prices to help guide you on the trade routes that you select. This matrix shows the list of all the cargo routes that are in the game today. To use this chart, find the port that you are currently at the top of the matrix. For example, I'm at Whitecrest at the moment, so I will use this as my example. Now I can go to a list of values for every port that I can go to sell cargo, and on each row is a price. The price shows the amount that you will have to sell each cargo for in order to hit the trade velocity number we showed on the ship rating chart from the previous section. In other words, you shouldn't be going to a port where the cargo price is below the amount shown on this screen. And as you can see for Whitecrest, some of these numbers will be higher than the recommended number and some of them will be lower. And this is the impact of other players and their chosen destination that they went to with their cargo. And the more cargo that goes to a specific destination, the lower the demand, and as a result, the lower the price at the trader. It's important to note that prices refresh every 2 hours, so you don't need to check the prices every single time you visit this port. Once you find a profitable route, just double check every 2 hours that it is still profitable. But your main goal is to find a sequence of ports where you are able to sell cargo for more than the value listed on this matrix. And once you find that sequence of port, run it repeatedly until the price resets and one of the stops is no longer considered profitable. Now, I realize this is a lot of information to be doing on the fly, especially if you're in the game trading, and this is literally the data that we collected, and it's been normalized to the trade value of each ship, as I had mentioned earlier. To help players identify which ports are the most profitable and to do it quickly, we have created a trade running calculator on our website, and it is linked in the description of this video, and it is based on this matrix of data. Note that in the future, our intention is to add the actual ship trading values in this data set as well, so that if you are watching this video in the future, the calculator may not appear exactly as it's shown in this video, but it is essentially the same calculator and the same data. To use this calculator, select the port where you are currently at in the drop-down above the table. Then visit the trader and enter the values for all the cargo prices for each port that you see in the trader. The calculator will then show you the unprofitable routes in red, the profitable routes in green, and black for ports which can be profitable, but it depends on how much dock time that you have to spend at each specific port. In addition, there is a profitability percentage in parentheses. The higher the number, the higher the profitability of this route. Numbers above 10% are good, and anything above 50% is exceptionally good. In general, you only want to run routes that are in green, and the percentage number is actually the most important number to be looking at, because the percentage shows you how much more than the listed trade velocity on the trade ship chart that you will be able to achieve on that route. For example, I am in a Brigand hauler at the moment, which has a trade velocity of around 50,000 per hour. And at Whitecrest, there is a port on this list that has a profit percentage of almost 50%, which means on this route, my trade velocity won't be 50,000 per hour, it will be 75,000 per hour. So that's the one you want to take. Once I'm at my destination, I then do the same routine again. I change the port I'm at on the calculator, then I check the numbers again, and I'll find the next profitable leg of my run. And then you rinse and repeat and do this over and over until you have created a full loop of profitable trade routes and run them for 2 hours, in some cases longer, assuming that the prices don't change by very much. And if you're like me, you will find out just how surprising it is and how much money you can make by using this method. There was a couple of things to be cautious of though. The main one is that ports that are upwind tend to have higher rates when viewed at the trader, but that's because fewer traders are actually running these, because again, they're upwind. And these ports you shouldn't be running either, even though they are green on the calculator. To determine if a port is upwind or downwind, face your avatar in the direction where these floating particles are going, and then press M or open your map if you're on mobile. In the center of the map is a small dot. This is what's called wind rock. If you draw a line from your current position, which is where the arrow is pointing, through wind rock in the middle, it will split your map into two. The arrow, which represents your current location, will point you in the direction of downwind. All the ports on this half of the map are considered downwind, and the area opposite of where your arrow is pointing is upwind. In all upwind, ports should be ignored while trading until you are comfortable with the handling of your ship and you know which ports are actually within your tolerance level for upwind travel. Upwind and downwind are very different for every port, so you would have to redo this exercise every single time you pick a new destination. And this exercise is important if you don't understand the mechanics, but by the time you've done enough trading and you realize how the wind actually works on the map, you can pretty much do this by just looking at the flag on the top of your ship, instead of this very elaborate exercise. And even then, as you trade more, it will become intuitive. And if you ask people in the game, they will even tell you that you should always be traveling in the direction of your flag. And this is generally very sound advice. Lastly, in past videos, we mentioned that ports that are farther away are generally worse options for trading. And this is still very much true. I found that shorter hops tend to pay more over time, and the farther your destination, the worse the investment. So, as I used to always say, if you are driving past a port, then you should stop and trade at that port. One exception to that rule would be if the cargo rating was lower when you use the calculator. And that's that. That really covers the core of cargo trading. I know that was a lot of detail, and I'm going to make it worse by answering some of the questions and concerns and comments that you, the players, have asked me while I was running this analysis over the past month, and also while I was making this video. And the first and most common question I get is cargo trading on Trade Guild a good idea after level 10? And the answer is yes, absolutely. If you don't need to level up anymore, and you are only interested in getting doubloons, I totally recommend that you do all of your trading on Trade Guild, at least in the current environment that has been set up within the game. Let me explain. When I was running this analysis, the game was set up so that every faction except Trade Guild is at war with every other faction. This means that every other player is effectively an enemy, and a pirate, if you will. But more importantly than the pirating, the practical implication of this is that many of these would-be profitable ports and routes are actually off limits to you, because if you go there, you will get shot at. To explain what I mean, here is an example of a trade run that I did in a beaver. It involved trading at 4 ports, and it netted me a trade velocity of 72,000 per hour. However, this trade route is incredibly dangerous if I was on any other faction than Trade Guild, because 3 of these ports are potentially off limits to me, because these are home islands to hostile factions. Now let's say for a second that I was on one of these hostile factions, maybe Whitecrest. I might make it through one of these loops without sinking. But you are also getting shot at each of these hostile ports, and it is taking the form of attrition on your ship. So eventually you will get hit enough to the point where you can't run this loop anymore. I mean, I'm even getting shot at as a Trade Guild player, as you can see here, so you're definitely going to be shot at if you're a hostile faction, and you will take damage as that hostile faction. And yes, while you might make it a loop without sinking, even though you're taking damage at each of these ports, you're getting shot at each of these hostile ports, and it acts like attrition, so eventually you will hit a point where you can't run this loop anymore. And that is why I recommend only trading on Trade Guild right now. I mean, why would you limit yourself to only trading at a fraction of the ports in the game, when as Trade Guild you can trade at any of them? And you know, it's ironic really. The devs are doing everything they can to make it difficult to experience end-game content without doing PvP, meaning you can't do it on Trade Guild. But the full unfettered beauty of creating the perfect trade route and then running that trade route can only be experienced in Trade Guild. Even if you take away the fact that every other faction is forced to take less profitable routes than you, while you always on Trade Guild get to take the most profitable ones, the other thing that people keep telling me is that the beaver makes less money than N-tier trading ships, but I kid you not. I make more money per hour on a beaver than I would on pretty much any other ship in the game. And to the naysayers who are going to say that I'm just making this up, I actually streamed 8 hours worth of content, and here were the actual amounts I made running a beaver over those 8 hours. I mean, all of these runs were easily hitting between 60 to 70,000 doubloons per hour every time. I'll even add that while I did all this while I was talking to players. I even did some sightseeing, I visited some houses, I spent some time on Harrisburg. Someone even gifted me a silver axe, so I stopped and did that for a little while. I mean, I even had a guest appearance from Joe, who was AKing another ship who rammed me, and I stopped to watch Frog appear over one of the nameless islands. I even spent time showing players my piloting approach and how I can shave off like 30 seconds every time I enter and exit a port. And I even took time to explain the calculator on these streams, and it means I wasn't even putting the full effort into trying to maximize my results. And then when I did, I was able to get above 70,000 per hour. So if I can achieve these numbers on Trade Guild, then so can you. And these numbers are higher than the average rates that you're going to get on any other ship. At least when you take into account that you're doing it over time. I mean, like I said, you can do one run or so and you'll get up to 100,000 doubloons per hour, but you got a limit on how far that can go, and you're likely to get intercepted by pirates if you don't get sunk by the cannons on pretty much all the ports, because they all have cannons now, or most of them do. And of course, that leads into the next question, and that's more general. Is cargo trading still profitable after the update? And again, my answer is yes. Yes, it absolutely is. Look at these numbers from my live stream again. I mean, in the old system, the most money I ever made in a beaver was around 40,000 per hour, and I'm now making well over that. and I mean consistently over that. And I've been able to get it up to about 75,000 per hour if I'm really grinding hard and paying attention. And truthfully, I was able to maximize even the Brigand out at 100,000 per hour, as I'd mentioned earlier, and that was when I was really focused on what I was doing when trading. It's just harder to do this consistently, like I said, because you are the target of literally every other faction right now. But it is possible, sure, that you can get 100,000 per hour consistently, especially if you have a large enough crew to support you and you're good at fending off pirates and know how to avoid getting shot at ports, which are static, so, you know, that's the thing. But I'll even point out that with the Brigand now able to max out at close to around 100,000, it's worth noting that before the update, I was able to max it out somewhere between 50 to 55,000 usually. So even this is higher than it was before the update. The issue that I think leads to this question is that players keep taking long routes that the in-game interface makes you think is profitable, but actually they're incredibly not profitable. This leads to lower profitability over time, and players can figure that out after you've done it for a couple of hours and realize, hey, I'm making about half what I was making before. For example, look at these rates at Nassau. And I know Nassau is considered to be one of the best ports by experienced traders, and it definitely was before the update. But there is no reason why anyone should be going here with the rates that this place has. And yet I see ships coming into this port constantly. Why? It's because the in-game interface doesn't give you clear indication of what is profitable and what's not profitable, which is why I've created the calculator, which is linked again to the description in this video, and I hope that it helps people find those profitable routes so they can experience the same level of productivity that I'm seeing. And that leads me now into the third most asked question, and that is, what are the most profitable and least profitable ports in this game? Well, I'll start with the most profitable ones that I found on my runs. Now understand that by revealing this to you, it may not be true when you run these. That's because if players are smart, everyone will start running these routes as soon as I post this video, which will inevitably bring the prices down at all of these ports. But nevertheless, these were my anchor points for most of my runs. And the top three in order are, number 1, Blackwind Cove, 2, Perth, and 3, Fenwick. Blackwind was the most consistently profitable port by far. This makes sense actually, because you don't usually take cargo out of here if you are raiding, you take it in. And it's dangerous to go here too if you're on any other faction other than Trade Guild, because both the entrance and exits are easily shut off by the Blackwind faction, which is based here. That means that they can trap their enemies until those ships are sunk, so you have to be in and out quick. But if you decide to go here, I did find that Harrisburg is typically a profitable way out, but most of the other ones that are nearby, including Fort Verner, Nova Balruska, and Perth, were usually good next stops. And by next stops, I mean, in some cases, they were as high as 50% above the average profitability, which if you go back and do the math on that, is how I got to my 60,000 doubloons per hour on a beaver on Trade Guild. The next two are products of being close to other ports, so trade routes are shorter. And I guess if there's one piece of advice I can give you is that short hauls are better than long ones. The payout is quicker, the percentage that you gain is higher, and that means that you can buy cargo and you can sell it someplace else a lot faster, meaning your routes can be done a lot faster. Moreover, Perth and Fenwick, again, they're both about the same in a distant second and third. The one other advantage is that a lot of people tend to just skip these ports, although by the time I'm recording this video, it was definitely true of this way in December, but by the time I'm recording this video, I did notice there are more people starting to recognize they should actually be stopping here instead of bypassing it. And now, the three worst ports in the game are easily Birkeland, Nassau, and Cannoneer's Key, and they are worse in that order. Birkeland is by far the worst port in the first slot. That is just because it is way too far away, and it doesn't help that for every port in the game, the value in the trader is the highest, so people keep going there, which means the values are getting lower. And if you look at the prices required to be profitable, you'll see that in most cases, you have to have a doubloon price of upwards of 1,000 doubloons before that becomes a profitable route. And we're talking about places like Nassau where this sells for 600 doubloons, so people should not be taking 600 doubloon cargo to Birkeland. It's just not profitable. In fact, it's almost 50% less profitable than any other route, which means you're going to be earning way less than any other trader. And I'll even add that in all the time that I was playing, I never saw a single price hit 4 digits. And the only port I ever saw even have marginable profitability with this was actually Harrisburg, which is the one that is closest to Birkeland. not only are the journeys to Birkeland bad, but the return trips are not any better. And most people are taking them to the next two worst ports in the game, and the next one I'll talk about is actually Nassau. It's easily second. And it has the unfortunate impact of having two factions start here. And one of them, of course, again, is Trade Guild. And that means that it is both isolated in a corner of the map, so there's literally no place to go. Players can only go in one direction when they're trading, which means that pretty much every price from this port is going to be in the red. And I mean deep in the red, like hundreds of points, which means it will not be corrected anytime soon. And because inexperienced players also start here, it also sets up the game that if you are a new player to the game, you're going to think that cargo is a horrible grind because you literally have nowhere else to go out of here to actually make a good profit. And it makes all of your ships feel like they're twice as bad as they should be. Then the third one, of course, is Cannoneer's Quay, whose trader sits in the middle of its cove, and it literally blocks you from having a direct route to all but two ports on the map. In other words, your dock time here is going to be terrible, no matter how you slice it, and you are required to go upwind at least once, either on entry or exit, and there's just no way around it. Some cases you have to go upwind both entry and exit, not to mention that it is also isolated from the rest of the map, similar to Nassau. And finally, I will give an honorable mention for a good port, and that is Whitecrest. The island update moved the trader to the outside of the port, making this actually a good stopover in most cases. But the detractor to Whitecrest, which keeps it from being listed as a good port, is the fact that it is a faction start island, which means players tend to just grab cargo here and then go to whatever destination they were planning to go to anyway, and this has the unfortunate side effect of reducing cargo prices as a result. And that's going to be true for all faction starting islands, including Nassau, as I've already mentioned, is the worst of all of these. And on the topic of cargo prices, now there's another question, and that is, do unprofitable cargo prices ever become profitable? The answer is kind of. I mean, yes, while I was running these trade runs and doing this analysis, routes did turn from unprofitable to profitable, only for them to go back and forth again. And actually, I remember that there were at least 3 routes that went from unprofitable to profitable by the time I'd finished. And one of them was actually a route to Birkeland, which was a big deal because it happened on stream after I just finished a long discussion about why all the routes to Birkeland were unprofitable. So that happened. And you know what? It might actually be fish trading. Let's check fish trading here in a second. Whitecrest is 179. Birkeland is never profitable. It's going to be my catchphrase, 680. Oh, it is. That's the first time I've ever seen Birkeland be profitable. Holy crap. Man. Yeah, you should be taking the Birkeland route, guys, right now. Take it until the price is reset. What's this, 678? Yeah, Birkeland prices are profitable. Holy crap. That's the first I've ever seen. It has been close all game. I mean, all for the last week. This is the first time it's actually gone above. But to answer the question, is it possible? Yes. But there is a deeper response as to why the answer is no, not really. And it's because the price changes are very slow. Now, I will admit that I didn't actually record these. This is going to be more of a feel based on what I saw happening while I was doing these runs. But what I remember is that cargo prices reset about every 2 hours. And when I was watching the cargo price resets, the movement was always up or down 2 points or less. In some cases, it would just stay the same. And that means the prices on cargo are moving at roughly 1 point per hour. So if you consider this route from Nassau to Birkeland, which is 3 figures deep in the red, it will take days if no one trades here. And more realistically, it will take months before this will ever become profitable. And if you watch the stream, I even said that I calculated out how much it had changed over the course of 1 month, and I suggested it could take 6 months to a year. So it's going to be a very long time before you ever see this happen without dev intervention or something crazy happening behind the scenes that I'm not aware of. So back to that question, no, this is not a profitable route, and it will never be a profitable route in the foreseeable future. So I'm not going to say that it will be, even though I know it has the potential to be. And moreover, I believe that there is a maximum or do not exceed threshold on prices for certain cargo. I don't think they left this completely in the open, and I'm basing this on the fact that, and again, it's a feeling, not proof, but an assumption based on what I saw. There is a minimum which prices do not seem to go below, and that number is 30. It's actually 24 if you're on a low population server. And so because there is a minimum, I believe there is also a max. And This belief comes from the fact that in all of my trading, some of the routes never became profitable, despite my belief that nobody was trading these routes, because I never saw anybody else doing them, and they were so unprofitable even for me, I don't even know why people would be doing them. Moreover, the number seems to hit a point where both cargo options are identical, and this seems to be the maximum threshold. I never saw it exceed this number in some cases, but again, this is just a feeling. Again, I can't prove it, because there are many other factors that I believe are also in play, such as server population, which I'd already mentioned, the fact that they don't publicly reveal how much cargo is actually being traded at all of these destinations that impact the prices, and of course there's no clarity if it's a volume-based system or a percentage-based system. Again, I can't prove it, but I don't think it's a percentage-based system, despite the fact that I feel like that makes more sense. What I mean by a percentage-based system is that prices are based on what percentage of cargo is traded to what port. Because if it was, then the average cargo prices for each of the ports that are listed in the trader, if you average them out, they would stay consistent. But in the cases I've been playing, it doesn't seem to stay consistent. But that means that it's volume-based. And if it's volume-based, there's an even bigger problem. And that is if the concurrent population of players in the game ever increases, then the prices are going to plummet across the board, which in turn, by the way, will negatively impact new players' experience and cause them to want to quit the game because you can't be profitable doing trade runs, which is bad for everybody all around. So I have a hard time believing this is how it actually works right now, despite the fact that all of my data seems to suggest that this is how it is working right now. And so that's a long way of saying right now there are in fact trade routes that are inherently not profitable, and they are likely to stay that way. The next question that I get asked is trading solo better than trading with a crew? And the answer here is crew trading is definitely better. It is more profitable, and I have the data to back that up. I recommend the following setup if you're trying to trade in a crew and you haven't done it in the past. This applies to pretty much all ships that are above level 3. In your crew, you want one captain. This is the person who owns the ship, and he usually stands on the bow of the ship, and then you want a second person to pilot the ship, who will sit on the helm of your ship. The captain is responsible for managing all trading, destination setting, and profitability. The pilot, on the other hand, is responsible for knowing how to handle each ship, including maximizing speed to destination, as well as maneuvering in each port effectively. If you do something like this, the setup will easily add thousands of doubloons to your trade velocity when done right. Then optionally, especially if you're not playing on Trade Guild, you can add a crew up to the number of cannons on your broadside, -1. You can obviously add more, but you're really aiming to have a full broadside here. The -1 reflects giving a seat on that broadside to the captain who would be otherwise sitting on the bow, and he would do this in the case of an emergency. Now, these members don't have to be crackshot Navy vets or anything. You aren't going to war, right? You're not a warship. Instead, you're aiming for a concept called deterrence. You're trying to make it difficult for a would-be attacker to get you and convince them to pick a less tempting target. And if you're playing on Trade Guild, this optional addition of the crew is not necessary. But if you decide to do it, and if you are an experienced captain, I recommend taking low-level new players with you for 2 reasons. 1, Nassau is the worst starting port in the entire game, so help them get out of here before they quit the game in frustration. And second, large ships can often mean quicker leveling up, and the faster they level up, the more they can contribute to the game, make it out on their own, and then they can feel like they've won the trading journey. And also keep in mind that pirating is more prominent due to this all factions war thing that's currently in place, so deterrence is important if you are in any faction other than Trade Guild. But also know that an experienced crew of raiders, especially when they are Navy crews, are going to attack you no matter what you do or how many people you have on your ship. So just know that your fate really isn't in your hands here, other than to stop opportunists from taking advantage of a solo trader. And that's the segue into the second to last question here, and that is premium cargo, fish cargo, and stolen cargo worth it? And this is a mixed bag. Premium cargo is affected by the same demand mechanics as regular cargo is, so you want to make sure that you're getting your money's worth. And again, the price calculator can help you with this, but there's a little bit more to it for this kind of cargo. The calculator is giving you the price for standard cargo. So you should be expecting even higher returns than normal if you're using premium cargo. I normally aim for something that's over 50% profitability, and I use that as my bare minimum instead of 0. The same is true for fish cargo. Remember that for both of these, you are using materials and fish to purchase this that would otherwise be sold on the open market. And that means they have a value. So if you can, or if you know it, you should subtract the market price for those items before you enter it into the calculator, because the calculator is showing you what you would get if you didn't use those resources, meaning your profitability should be higher than the default number. Let me use an example here to demonstrate. So if I were to purchase instruments at Nova Bauresca, this requires copper. Copper can usually be sold for around 150 per piece, so I need to subtract 150 doubloons from the price of this when I enter it into the calculator, because that's the standard rate. I could use standard cargo and get those prices. So the total price that I'd be getting should be 150 doubloons more than the standard rate, if you catch my drift. And that's effectively what you need to do when you're using the calculator in this instance. It's also worth noting that the trading I did on stream, in all of the calculations I did for trade velocity and the others, were all using standard cargo pricing. So that means I was making 100,000 per hour with the standard cargo, not premium cargo, which means if I had run premium cargo on these, I would be expecting well over 125,000 in order for me to consider those at the same level of profitability. And if it wasn't, then I would not consider buying that cargo for those routes. And that's those two. And the third one is stolen cargo. And that's really going to break the mold here from a lot of what I've been saying so far. And it has to do with the fact that this new system of pricing actually creates an exponential effect for stolen cargo. And that means stolen cargo can be worth it, but you have to pick wisely. I do not recommend picking off cargo from traders who are selling on the inner routes. That's places like Fenwick, Perth, Nova Bauresca, and the like. Honestly, you're just wasting your time here because this cargo will never give you the multiplier that's actually worth it. You're better off just trading cargo versus trying to steal it. The payoff is too small. But what you really want to do is you want to stake out high ticket cargo. And that's going to come from the three ports I told you were the worst ones before, and now they're the best in this case, and that's going to be Birkeland, Nassau, and Cannoneers Quay. And that's because unlike regular cargo, let's just assume a 2x multiplier here just for simple math. The price increase is worth it for the farther you go, and you want to take this the maximum distance. So consider this example. Let's say that you're a pirate ship and you've got two possible targets in front of you. One has cargo coming from Fenwick and the other one has cargo that is coming from Nassau. And let's assume that both of these are currently destined for Birkeland and you are currently at either Blackwind Cove or at Whitecrest. If you steal the cargo from Fenwick, it's probably worth around 100 doubloons. And if you add the 2x multiplier, it might be worth 200 doubloons. And even if you decide to take that all the way to Birkeland, you might get up to 400 doubloons on that. But if you steal that cargo that is coming from Nassau and it's bound for Birkeland, and there's a 2x multiplier on it, the standard price on that, let's assume, is 600 doubloons. That means that you would be able to sell that cargo for 1,200 doubloons. Remember earlier when I said that in order for it to be profitable, it needs to be over 1,000 doubloons? Well, that makes this absolutely worth it. And chances are, if you manage to sell it in Birkeland, you might actually catch somebody who has cargo with a standard price of 800, which means you can then sell this at either Cannoneers Quay or Nassau for 1,600, making this some of the most profitable routes in the game. And that means it is worth staking out ships that are coming from Nassau, Cannoneers Quay, or Birkeland and stealing their cargo, because the payoff is effectively exponential on longer hauls. And with the way this new cargo pricing system is working right now, that means you can be the most profitable trader in the game. And real quick, the next question was, why did I use the Albatross base variant and not the Albatross hauler variant? The hauler variant was a limited time variant, and that would have been a better comparison to the Brigand hauler, which was also a limited variant. The answer is, I actually did both, and instead of a long-winded answer here, I just decided that I'm going to add both of these variants to the ship profitability chart. Here it is. And this is just to avoid confusion in the future, because I'm sure people are going to ask me this again. And the real reason that it didn't compare with the Brigand, and the reason it didn't show up on the original chart, was because the Albatross base variant was better at trading. And the Albatross base variant is one of the two best variants in the game. And the reason is that the base variant is a speed 9 ship, but the hauler variant of the Albatross is actually a speed 8 ship. And yes, I'm aware that the wiki, the shipwright, and every other official source says that it's a speed 9 ship. The reduction is because of the hauler's sail plan, not because of its default speed. And if you are still in doubt, here's how I actually figured it out. This is the average sail speed we got during our runs. Mind you, every ship and every variant all ran the exact same routes. Here's the average speed of other ships that are also listed at speed 9, and here are other ships that are listed at speed 8. So yeah, I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on that. And if the community really wants me to show the detailed analysis for this, then let me know in the comments and I will do that. But spoilers, the section of the video on points of sale and how forgiving Crosswind actually is in this game is really the leading factor. And then the final question I got was, can you put this calculator somewhere other than the website? Like, can you just add it to the game? The answer is, I don't know why it's not in the game. I actually think it should be in the game. And this wasn't really a heavy development effort, honestly. I mentioned this on Discord while I was making it to the people who were asking me questions about it. Finishing off the data collection for this took me about 2 weeks after this update on December 19th had happened. And that was heads down trading, that's all I was doing. So if I ignored you while I was playing the game, that was why. This is because I had to collect all of this data, but if you think about the devs' perspective, they have all this data already, because they have access to how every player is playing the game. They also would have done significant playtesting before they released a feature this size. And I'm sure they have all of the values and of course their code stored in a database somewhere. Then it took me about 6 hours after I'd done the collection of the data to actually code the first version of the calculator, and after that, I actually realized I was just adding to the confusion by supplying the players with a bunch of extra numbers that didn't have any context, so I stopped that and I spent 2 additional hours creating the percentage system that you see today. And then it took another full day for me to upload that as it was replicated across our CDN, which means that I spent a total of 8 hours of development effort spread across 2 days, which is a fairly small effort from a development perspective, which means that this system could exist. It's just a matter of if it will exist. But in the meantime, I personally found it effective to have this calculator open on my phone while I was doing my trade run so I could quickly type in all the necessary information. And to that end, assuming that other players would be in the same boat, I did try to make the interface as mobile friendly as I could. But if you have suggestions on how I can improve it, please let me know, and I definitely will do what I can to make it so it's easy for you to use and understand. And that's it for questions here. I do have a lot more that were asked that I won't be able to cover because this video is also pretty long as it is, and I can always answer them in future videos. But for now, let me just end this by giving you a quick summary and some parting advice. First, be aware that the trade velocity of each ship has changed. I've put a link to the new chart that shows you the expected trade velocity you should be getting in each of these trade ships at present. There is also a calculator that will help you determine which trade route is the most profitable and which trade routes should be avoided. And this takes into account the fact that cargo prices do change over time, and they will be updated every 2 hours. Shorter distances are typically better than longer distances, and cargo prices change very slowly over time, so you only have to occasionally go back and check that your run is still profitable. So my general advice is, once you have found a loop that is very profitable, you should continue running that loop until you're feeling like it is no longer profitable. And when it comes to trading, always remember that there's really no wrong trade ship or wrong trade route. The only way to truly be unprofitable in trade running is if you never take your trade ship out in the first place. So I hope you will join me on trying to find and run some of these really profitable routes. And as always, feel free to ask me questions in-game if you have them, because if there's one thing I really enjoy, it's watching all of you become successful in this game as well. And with that, I'm going to go on my next trade run, and I look forward to seeing all of you work your way towards becoming one of Tradelands' wealthiest merchants.